Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode of Dungeons & Dragons Horror Stories, we have a few tales of people so ridiculous they put other antagonists of these stories to shame. But first, if you end up enjoying the video, it would help this Doge out a lot if you could roll a crit on that like button, comment, and subscribe to the channel. With that said, let's hop right into these stories. Not sure if it was me or the player, by a Reddit user who wishes to remain anonymous. So, a couple of years ago, I was running an Adventurers League game. It was before I started DMing on the regular, and I had a rather large table of 8 people. It started as 5, but 3 came late and my regular DM at the time was sick. I had just picked up the Essentials kit, but was unable to read it, and it was the only thing I had on me that I could DM. Now, the table was 2 of my regular players, 3 new players who had never played before, and then this family who came late. The family was a mom who didn't say much about her kids and was playing a ranger, son playing a paladin, daughter playing a druid, and son number 2. He was offered a spot but opted to play games on his Game Boy instead. He's relevant at the very end. The first thing I asked was, due to the adventure and how many new players there were, I asked that everyone start at level 1. The son and daughter in this family then argued with me about how they had 3rd level characters, and that's what they wanted to play, and I calmly explained why that wasn't an option. Explaining the adventure and where we were starting called for level 1 characters. Then they were mad that I grabbed them pre-gens that weren't built for them, but refused to make their own characters, or let someone not at the table help them. By this point, our table is a half an hour late starting because of these 3. Then they named their pre-gens the same as their level 3 characters. Not much comes of it though. At first they are rolling average, if not a little bit poorly. But then the Manticore fight starts, which I scaled up because of the number of players, and then the son who was playing a paladin got hit hard with the Manticore spike. He gets mad at me for hitting his character and starts sulking. We go through 2 rounds of combat after this hit, and he is like, "Oh wait, I forgot a paladin skill when you hit me with the nat 20. I told him that that's too bad, you'll have to remember next time. But we aren't going to retcon 3 rounds of combat for you to fix what you missed." Then, the 2 fighters were doing significantly more damage than the paladin, so I had the Manticores focus on the fighters instead of the paladin, under the understanding that the Manticores don't want to die and are going to hit something hitting them hard. And then he says he's done more damage than the fighters have the whole combat. He did really good damage on his first turn, but was about average after that. The Manticore fight ends, and the kid's mom, his sister, and the kid start accusing me of not giving out enough credit for everyone at the table. It was milestone leveling, and even if it wasn't, they'd all have gotten equal XP to get them to level 3 at the same time. Then starts the next section, and the rogue wanted to check for traps, and the paladin decides that he's still not getting enough attention. He sat and sulked because I didn't give his character the healing potion, but had people roll off for it because 5 out of 8 players wanted it. And the sorcerer won the roll-off with an 18, and the paladin rolled an 8. He then trampled ahead of the rogue and fell into a trap and took a lot of damage. And then he threw his dice container at me, and this is maybe where I was in the wrong, as there was a half hour of game time left. I told everyone the game was done for the night, put his dice container on the table, and started packing my stuff up. The mom got up and took her kids and left. Then a couple weeks passed, and I didn't see them for a while. But then they came back and told the store owners that I was rude, excluded their autistic child, and was ableist and racist towards them. That same night, my monster manual came up missing. I talked to the store owner about it, and he said he'd check the cameras. We found out that the paladin kid took it, and he told me what they said. And then a week after that, they wanted to be at my table again, and I told them no, my table was full. And they then called me an ableist, elitist, gatekeeping, racist bitch, because I didn't give them what they wanted and was excluding their autistic family member who didn't want to play anyway. I'm starting to wonder if maybe I just wasn't a good enough DM the few times I ran into them, and that they are right, that I'm a bitch. Well, the only thing that comes to mind when reading this story is Karen. OP had a set of rules for his game, but this mother seemed like she wanted her family to have special treatment. Then, when she didn't get what she wanted, she decided to Karen out and throw accusations towards the DM, even though they were being fair to all the players at the table. Then she wonders why OP didn't want them at her table. Maybe it's because one of her kids threw a tantrum and stole one of their books. So, OP, if you're asking if you were the bitch, this Doge says no. Though, what do y'all think? On to the next story. A series of long years of playing D&D with a creepy ex, by Reddit user Corny Cryolo. So, after many years of silence, I decided to open up about this more to the public and share my own RPG horror story, or series/progression of stories if you will, about my ex-boyfriend, some acquaintances, and a couple of friends who I'm still very close to this day. This all happened a couple of years back when everyone involved was younger and we were in school. Obviously, however, myself included, this doesn't fully excuse the behaviors that were exhibited by certain people. I am currently a 19-year-old female, but back then, I was 13 to 17-ish. Details may be fuzzier and vague, as well as a little all over the place due to it happening in chunks over the years. So apologies on that front. My ex is a year older than me. Here's our cast of important people. Names are changed for their privacy. X, my ex-boyfriend. Non, male, DM number 1. K, male, DM number 2. Bane, male player, unstable temper. There were other players there too, obviously, but weren't too involved, and I mainly want to focus on my ex's deeds. As a note, K and Non played and still play as a player in each other's campaigns, and we're all part of the same friend group. For example, K played in Non's game, and Non played in K's game. The first chunk of the story was the time when I was in Non's campaign, when it was early in the story and my ex and I were dating, and Non's sister was still playing, along with another dude who dropped out and basically disappeared. It first started when we were at an event called Solo Ensemble, and I had said that I wanted to join the D&D campaign that Non was running. I wanted a griffin, and my stubborn 8th grade self created a character that is still alive and in said campaign to this day. We compensated, and so I made Fele Foster, a young Beastmaster Ranger with a griffin. Yes, I'm aware that that's not an option by Raw, but please don't be a rules lawyer. My ex's character was Sans. Yes, that Sans from Undertale. He had an obsession with Undertale, even more than I did. He was a construct of some type, I think. I found it slightly cringy, but didn't think much of it, nor did the other players. The problem my ex had, which is a continued theme with him, is roleplay bleed. For those uninformed, it's basically where your own personal emotions bleed into character, or vice versa. In this case, and the cases afterwards, it was a weird, dangerous feedback loop. I don't quite remember the turning point of where Sans got depressed, but in a near TPK, where the half-orc in the party at the time was the only one who was conscious, X had just let his character Sans die. He kinda shrugged it off though, eventually. In comes his new character, Sprocket. I do have to mention a few things first. Out of character, there were things going on in the background which really weren't great, but I didn't tell anyone about it either, because I didn't know it wasn't normal. Again, I was around maybe 14ish at this time, maybe 15. X began to fake dissociative identity disorder, and start heavily relying on me for emotional support, and began to become more pushy about sexual things, which I wasn't okay with. All of these behaviors worsened over time. Continuing, his new character at first was pretty okay. Nothing too special, except for the fact that his dwarf character had an obsession with his weapon. It would even get to the point where he'd protect and practically cuddle with it. Even weirder, he tried to get close to Fele and her snappy griffin, Luna, who nearly bit him as a warning. Non said much later that it was the DM's way of telling him to fuck off slightly. Other campaigns, which K was now DMing, which could be considered experimental before landing on his current day-long running campaign, this time was in between Non's campaign. One of these short experimental campaigns, enter the half-elf, Orin, my ex's bard, and my wood-elf druid, Irene. I can't quite remember what went down. However, I believe some villain managed to capture Irene, and threatened to kill her. Orin had to kill someone on a cart who we had to protect to release her. He did, And remember the dangerous roleplay bleed loop I mentioned? And the whole faking DID thing? Yep, you guessed it. Here we go again, but even worse. Oren, the character, got depressed, and so did my ex. I was the cleanup crew for him, which was insanely mentally tiring for me because I was going through my own things as well. Oren eventually also became an alternate personality, and a fucking creepy one at that. Though I never told anyone about the alter/DID thing, because again, I believed him when I was a minor, and I was stupid and lovesick. Outside of campaign, he used it to justify basically sexually assaulting me when I told him that I really didn't want to be touched sexually and blamed it on his alter instead of himself. Eventually, Kay invited a new player, Bane, to his campaigns. I already felt iffy about Bane due to the fact that I knew he had incredibly bad mood swings, just from his behavior at school, but I thought at the time he was okay, because he was mostly chill otherwise. I won't linger on his incidents too much, but there was one in particular where we had an evil vampire campaign where it was the one time my ex and I collaborated on characters. My ex was slightly weird about it, considering my snobby warlock gal had a protector, which was my ex's character. It offsets and weirds me out now, but at the time, I didn't find much odd about it. Bane, out of nowhere, yells at us with something along the lines of, quote, "Your characters don't always have to be together. Ugh, I'm so sick of it." Kay tried to calm him down if I recall correctly, and the situation diffused. Eventually though, he was kicked out after intentionally pissing off an ancient red dragon and their beholder guards, and nearly making the party TPK. That campaign ended there though as well. In a separate campaign, where I put back Irene, joined by her older brother Bevan, my ex put back Oren. Almost immediately, he tried flirting with my clearly not interested druid. In the background, he kept trying to ship her with Oren, as well as my other characters with his, even if they really wouldn't be interested. He was pushy with this as well, and sometimes tried to engage in borderline erotic roleplay with me. Hopping back to Nan's one campaign with Fele, after a long hiatus of a couple of years, and moving to online games, I eventually did break up with my ex at age 17, after finally giving myself the courage to say no, after him continually gaslighting, tearing me down, saying, quote, "Well, I guess you don't love me anymore then," over and over, then threatening suicide after I said I didn't feel the love for him anymore. I was done. Nan, after banning him from the Discord server in Roll20, after I had opened up about what had happened, sending screenshots, etc., immediately killed Sprocket with an evil NPC the very next session, which was insanely therapeutic for me. Kay also banned him and cut contact, along with everyone else in the friend group. Thus ends the series of stories about my creepy ex. Today, without my ex, I've bonded very close to a set few friends, and I've been doing much better for myself and coming out of my shell a lot more. Both the D&D campaigns and the friendship I have are healthy ones, and I'm so glad to be with these people. I love them all to death, and the dumb shenanigans we all get ourselves into, both in and out of the game. We've all grown as people, and I'm so glad to be out of that rough patch. Wow, talk about manipulative. OP's ex sounds like a real piece of crap. Faking something like dissociative identity disorder to manipulate someone into something like that, and then blaming another personality for it is real scum of the earth type behavior. I know from experience how a family member with DID can affect someone, and for someone to fake it in and of itself is really shitty. Then to threaten suicide when OP had enough and decided to break things off on top of everything else. I'm just glad OP got out of that situation and seems to have grown closer to her friends and is enjoying playing more D&D with them. Let's get to the last story. Player says he wants to murder us. Doesn't understand why we don't want him back in session. By Reddit user, Throwaway Ambulance. This is a story about a murder hobo and the stupid amount of entitlement he had in and out of character. The cast is set. The DM, our murder hobo, and myself. This is a group that we started amongst coworkers while combating the pandemic. I ended up joining months later while Murder Hobo was there closer to the start. While our DM had professionally hosted sessions before, the rest of us were fairly new and had never played a full campaign. Most games are usually hosted after working hours and within our workspace, with permission of course. The murder hobo and I never had a great working relationship. As a coworker, I considered him a lazy, entitled piece of shit whose entire personality revolved around being an edgelord. He was the type of person who thought it was the funniest thing in the world to gaslight people or show knives at work. I never put up with his sense of entitlement or edgy behavior, which would usually result in a mega tantrum from him. I'm certain he hated me for it. I tried not to let him turn me off of D&D though. The murder hobo turned out to be a nightmare to play with. He would always attempt to provoke angry or hostile actions from NPCs, even allies. If we're hiding while enemy NPCs lurked nearby, he would find a way to alert them to our presence and throw us into combat. Out of character, he would chide the DM for telling the story and demand more combat encounters. Keep in mind, his character would disengage in almost every encounter. He even gutted and harvested the organs of another player who was, supposedly, his character's best friend. The DM tore out at least 6 pages worth of side story from his notebook that day. Honestly, I think he was living out some edgy fantasy through his character. One day, while we're waiting for the rest of the players to arrive for our game, we see the murder hobo being escorted across the parking lot by a security guard. He had this little shit-eating grin plastered across his face as he was marched across the pavement, almost like he was proud of what he'd done. Only I and the DM were present when this happened. He was walked into the building, collects his things from his locker, and he's walked out. Needless to say, our session ended before it even started that day. Murder Hobo had been fired. We later found out from the Murder Hobo himself that he was compiling a rather long list of current and former coworkers, including those in our D&D group, that he, personally, wanted to murder, and that he mentioned this to a psychiatrist. Of course, this was immediately reported to the appropriate chain of command, and he'd been fired, nearly on the spot. It was eerie how nonchalant he was about the whole thing. He only tried to come back to the campaign once, the following week, but was swiftly turned away by the DM before he even had a chance to leave the parking lot. Last I heard, he'd been complaining to a former player about being banned from the game. He thinks that we were already bullying him, and it's unfair we won't allow him anywhere near the group. It's almost been a year since we last saw him. I don't think he'll ever make an attempt on our lives, mostly because he's a simpering coward. Since he's been gone, our game has been much more enjoyable, and the amount of combat and character deaths has gone down significantly. Good riddance, I say. Holy crap, talk about dodging a bullet, in this case, possibly literally. And the fact that Murder Hobo complained that they won't let him back into the game. Gee, I wonder why. Anyways, that will do it for today's episode of D&D Horror Stories. Do you have a story that you would like shared on the channel? If so, feel free to post it in the comments, on the channel subreddit r/D&D Doge, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope you never have to experience players like the ones in these stories. Until next time.